Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilove, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And today we're talking to an amazing woman. Her name is Devan Schultz, and she is an expert in sport and performance psychology who facilitates many conversations around the valuable life skills which can be learned through sports and the outdoors. She has worked with a variety of populations, from youth to collegiate athletes, competitive skiers and snowboarders, firefighters, and more. Devan also has extensive experience teaching mindfulness in nature, has worked as a behavioral health counselor, wilderness therapy guide, and spent 45 consecutive days in the backcountry of Southeast Alaska, utilizing the outdoors as a space for healing and teaching a multitude of life skills. And every time I read that or see that, I am blown away. I can't believe anybody would be able to do that. She's also the program director for Sacred Cycle, a nonprofit organization which empowers female survivors of sexual trauma through therapy and mountain biking, creating a sacred cycle of recovery, personal development, and community impact. Devan, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You have a fascinating story. I just absolutely love it. So would you just share with us how you got to this point in your life? When did you develop this passion for sports psychology? Because I think that's really important, especially sports and performance and being able to wrap your mind around competing and that type of thing. So just take it away and tell us your story.
Yeah, the conversation of sport and performance psychology has really grown lately, especially with the recent Olympics. And so how I became involved in it, I was an athlete from early on, playing all of the sports, but primarily focusing on soccer. And then I went on to play Division I collegiate soccer. And that's where it kind of hit me how mental athletics can be and how much your performance can depend on your mindset. And once I grew up in a small town. So once I became I was the big fish in the small pond, and then I kind of became the small fish in the big pond in college, and it knocked me down a bit. And that's where, like I mentioned, I realized how important sports psychology can be. And so in undergrad, I started conducting my own research studies around sports psychology. And then after undergrad, I pursued my master's degree in sport and performance psychology. Yeah.
And then where did you go from there? Because with a degree in sport and performance psychology, especially considering that it was probably a fairly new field. So, did your family say, hey, you're kind of crazy for doing this because you're never going to get a job? Or, what happened then?
There was definitely talk about how, there's not that many career options yet in the field. They were primarily, the military was hiring a lot of sports psychology degree master students, and then baseball as well were kind of the top two. But other than that, it wasn't as talked about as much. It's a very growing field, especially in these recent years. And so, how I kind of found my way into what I do now with Sacred Cycle, I moved out to Denver to pursue my master's degree. And that's where I kind of fell in love with the outdoors. I was, going through an identity change from being a collegiate athlete to now not competing in sport. And so I started spending a lot of time hiking and camping and backpacking. And that's where I drew that connection of how just spending time outdoors and challenging yourself in those ways can teach a lot of these same life skills and skills that you learn through sport. So that's where I wanted to kind of blend my master's degree with the outdoors. and when I pursued then to work as a wilderness therapy guide in Alaska.
So I'm just really curious, going from being a competitive athlete to then being on the other side of really kind of being like a coach, and therapist for athletes, was that a really hard transition for you?
It wasn't too hard in the aspect that I was still surrounding myself with it, right? Like I was still being engaged through sport in a different setting, and then also being engaged by the outdoors in general. And so I think most athletes have experienced this at some time, that loss of identity when they do shift from being like a full-time athlete to then that transition out of sport. And so, like I mentioned, the bringing the outdoors into my life and like fully embracing it, that helped that transition a lot. And my identity kind of shifted into just loving being outside, and then also teaching those life skills through not only sport but the outdoors in general.
So I don't want to plug Colorado too much or make it sound too good, because we have enough people here now. But talk about coming to, I don't remember, I think you're from Wisconsin.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, so from Wisconsin, and I mean, I've never lived there, but I'm from Western Pennsylvania, so I know what the weather was like in Western Pennsylvania and the lifestyle. And coming from back east to living basically at the foot of the Colorado Rocky Mountains, talk about that. Again, don't make it sound too good.
Well, I instantly fell in love with the mountains. I think I did a high school trip where I first got a little taste of Colorado, and I knew it was just a place I had to get back to. I'm not trying to make it sound too good, but the weather is amazing. The winters are mild. I snowboard as well, so it's great to have the mountains right there.
Well, I love the fact that
I'm still here.
the winters are mild. And I think when people hear that, it's almost like a contradiction in terms, or it's like, wait a minute, that's an oxymoron. Because they see sometimes, they hear about the 2-foot snowstorms, or the 3 feet that we'll get, or the snowstorms that we get didn't we have one in May, earlier in May? I think so. Yeah. So they hear about that, and it's like, oh my gosh, who wants to live there? And you really don't, because it does snow a lot. But yeah, there is something magical about the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and they are so beautiful, and the weather is definitely pleasant most of the time.
Yeah, spend a winter in northern Wisconsin and you'll realize how mild it can be in Denver.
Yeah, or Western Pennsylvania. Yeah. So then how in the world did you end up in Alaska? Because I find that fascinating. And the fact that you spent, hang on, I have it, 45 consecutive days in the backcountry. So it's not like you're at a B&B, or you're at a nice little, mountain cabin that has electricity and plumbing. You're in the backcountry.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story actually, because after I graduated with my master's degree, I spent about 6 weeks traveling through Europe, part of the time with friends, and the other part just on my own, just with a backpack and staying at hostels. And it was nearing the end of my trip in Europe, and I was on like the coast of Italy, and I was having one of those moments of like, oh, I got to go back in a week. Like, what am I going to do when I get home? What's my next step? I haven't necessarily faced, the reality of work life, right? Like I went from undergrad straight to grad school. So it was kind of my first time stepping into that new world without having school. And so I started just searching around a little bit on the internet for some possible jobs. And I was thinking to myself, like, well, I could go anywhere. Where would I want to go? And right away, I thought of Alaska, like always a place I dreamed of traveling to. And so I found a job in Alaska that was hiring. And I think I sent in my original application in a hostel from Italy that same week. Yeah.
And so what position did you apply for, or how did you present yourself? Is it when you were doing, what was it? Did you as a behavioral health counselor, or as a wilderness therapy guide, or how did you apply for something like that, in case anybody's wondering?
Yeah. So the behavioral health counselor, that was here in Denver at an eating disorder clinic. And so the wilderness therapy guide was in Alaska, and it was a seasonal position, working with at-risk youth. And so again, teaching, all of those life skills, stress and anxiety management, mindfulness, confidence, communication, leadership, and teaching those skills in the backcountry setting. So like you said, 45 consecutive days was one of the trips I did.
And what was the first thing that you did at the end of the trip when you came back to civilization? Was it take a hot bath, have a hamburger? What was it?
It's interesting. It's such a shock coming back into society, because that particular trip, I didn't have any times where I was going back into town for anything. So that can happen if a kid needs to see a doctor or go to the dentist. But this particular trip, I didn't leave the backcountry at all. And so going back into town, and mind you, this is a very small Alaskan town, so it's not a big city or anything. It's just interesting having like cell phone service again and seeing a lot of people needing to go to the grocery store. But definitely took a hot shower was one of the first things. Because
go ahead.
When you're in the backcountry, you're typically showering in like lakes or runoff from glaciers. So it's very cold water.
Oh. Well, that reminds me, when you're talking about it, it reminds me of this old sitcom, and I think it was in the 80s, and I just absolutely loved it. And the name of it was Northern Exposure. I don't know if you had ever seen that, but it was about this tiny little town in Alaska in the back, like it was just a tiny little town. And I think it was a guy from New York who actually had finished medical school that got his medical school program paid for if he signed up to do 2 years or whatever in this little town. But it was hilarious. And it was one of my favorite shows. So, anybody who can spend 45 days in the wilderness in Southeast Alaska is just my hero. Plus, you have got to be an incredibly adaptable person.
Yes, there's a lot of adapting that takes place. But you'd be surprised, like, given the opportunity, the task, or maybe if you didn't necessarily have the choice, I think a lot of people can do it and are capable of doing it.
So then when you came back from Alaska, was that when you found sacred cycling and got involved with that, or how did that come about?
Somewhat. So as I mentioned, the Alaska position was seasonal. And so in the off season, kind of throughout the winter and early spring, I was working in Denver as a behavioral health counselor. And then I returned again back to Alaska the following season. And that was 2020, March of 2020. And we all know what came about then. And so that's when I came back to Denver once again. Turned out to be more permanent this time. But fortunately, I did find Sacred Cycle then. And that's where I'm at now.
So before we talk about Sacred Cycle, because I want you to give us a lot more information about that, but I'm just checking even my show notes. And the one thing I pulled some key points from both your LinkedIn profile and your profile on the Sacred Cycle website. And one of the things that you did say was, you talk about adaptability. So I was like, I didn't even realize that I had written that down when I said that you must be very adaptable. But you talk about adaptability and rolling with the changes and taking control of what you can take control of. But and you were talking, I think, specifically into, the mountain biking and how the weather is out of our control. And here in Colorado, it can change like in a heartbeat. It's a beautiful sunny day, and the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a hailstorm, or the temperature can drop 30 degrees. And I mean, it's just a horrible, dangerous lightning storm. So those are the things that are beyond our control, but we have to roll with it and adapt. And then you were talking about other things, such as like taking control of the handlebars and stuff when you're mountain biking. And as somebody who does not bike, I found that very fascinating. And I love your little helper in the background.
Yeah. My dog, her name is Gunnison. We call her Gunny.
Oh, I like that.
Another Colorado town. Yes. So yeah, being adaptable is just a huge life skill in general that we can all benefit from continuous practice, right? Sometimes it's a little easier to adapt to change, and sometimes it can be really, really difficult, depending on what the circumstances are. And so, I would say, like, whatever the situation, take what you can,
Mhm.
take what you can learn, take the good. And then at a certain point, you got to let go of the rest. So
Mhm.
as a good step in just adapting is like, take what you have, take the good things with you, and then let go of the rest and control what you can.
And I think something that the past 2.5 years have really made an impact on us is the need. We had pretty much adaptability forced upon us. I mean, in a situation that was very difficult. And for those of us who were able to, okay, adapt or deflect or redirect and find a path through this really tough time, came out of it a little bit less traumatized and scarred than people who are just, oh my gosh, I can't let control of this and I can't do what I used to do during this time. So that was a very interesting moment in history.
Yeah, definitely forced that, right? Like you said, forced everyone to adapt, of course, under different circumstances. And, perspective is huge in how you look at things. It's easy to kind of focus on what sucked, like what was not good.
Mhm.
But shifting that perspective to, okay, what did I learn? Where am I at now?
Mhm.
It's kind of like bringing yourself back to the present moment, which we talk
Mhm.
about a lot as well,
Mhm.
especially like mindfulness and that practice.
And you do talk a lot about mindfulness. And I think that you've
Mhm.
used, what was it, mindfulness in nature. And I love that because I love nature. I love being outdoors. I love being in the mountains. I love being in my backyard. And I think nature is a great big, it's just like a great big place to learn. I mean, it's an incredible
Mhm.
opportunity to learn not only about the outdoors, but about yourself and how you relate to it.
Yes. Yeah. When we talk about mindfulness, often what comes to mind is meditation, yoga, maybe just sitting or laying on your back or eyes closed. However, that's only like one way of practicing mindfulness,
Mhm.
when there's so many other different areas that you can practice it, because it's not something that you'll ever master. It's just something that you can keep working on. And so, like you said, practicing mindfulness when you go for a walk or a hike or even in the garden, it's really noticing your thoughts, accepting them for what they are, and then shifting your attention back to the present moment. And that often, when you're outside in nature, makes the experience even better.
It's so much richer and a lot more, to me, satisfying. I did a blog post just yesterday. I wrote a blog post on, mindful, what was it? Mindful meditation versus backyard TV. And I'm a fan of backyard TV. I think I told you this when we spoke last time, of just sitting in the middle of the yard and just looking at around, and the trees, watching even the grass grow, to me is fascinating. Um, but I cannot sit and meditate. So that's my way of just clearing my mind, my body, and just hitting the reset button. So there are so many
Yeah.
different ways of meditating. It's not just sitting there and going, yeah. So the
Yes.
other thing that you talk about is the restorative benefits of being outdoors, which we kind of just touched on, and the learning opportunities about being outdoors. And when we think about the outdoors, it goes from as simple as being walking in your neighborhood to hiking a 14er in the Colorado Rockies. So if you could just touch on that just a little bit.
Yeah. How those two experiences are very different. However, there can be both good and bad to each. And, hiking a 14er is a lot more physically demanding, right? It's going to force more attention, more of your mental capacity and physical capacity. And while that can be so demanding, it can also then still have similar sort of benefits to just spending time outside walking. Um, you don't necessarily have to like take either of those scenarios with judgment by saying like, oh, I just walked in the backyard. That wasn't good enough. I didn't hike a 14er. What can happen when you just go for a walk is you can clear your mind. Like we said, focusing on that moment. And how often do you go for a walk and pay attention to like every step you take, every smell, every sound, everything you're looking at? That's almost more challenging to do than hiking a 14er. Hiking a 14er, you're forced to pay attention. You're forced to watch your step. and it makes you in the present moment. Whereas just going for a walk, it can be so challenging to shift your attention to each step that you're taking. What does the wind feel against your hands? So while one may be more physically demanding, they can still both be very impactful mentally. And like I said, going for a walk, it might even be more of a mental challenge to be in the present moment because it doesn't require as much attention.
Exactly. And we often just go back into our old habits and patterns of just,
Mm-hmm.
forward and not paying attention to the scenery and the environment around us.
Yeah, a great analogy to that, as you just saw my dog run through the background, is if you have a dog or you're taking your dog for a walk, if you notice what your dog's doing, they're smelling everything, they're hearing everything. That might be the highlight of your dog's day because they treat it like it's the first time they ever went for a walk. They are noticing and they are fully present in the moment. So a good practice if you do have a dog is to just go for a walk and try to be your dog. Try to treat it as if that's the first time you're walking, in your neighborhood, or the first time you're smelling freshly mowed lawn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing my dogs absolutely love. Thursdays is their favorite day of the week if they knew that we had days of the week, because that's the lawn service day. So as soon as the lawn, they mow the lawn, and as soon as they're gone, we open the door and they run out, and it's like they have never smelled grass before in their lives. And then of course, one of them just likes to do somersaults and roll around, and it's like, wow, I need to learn that. Just be so living in the moment and having that incredible joy for life that just the smell of freshly mowed grass. I don't know if I would really roll around in it, but maybe I will someday. I don't know. So now, when did you first become interested in skiing and snowboarding?
I've always been a bit interested in it throughout growing up, but being in Wisconsin, there's very limited ski hills. I did go on a couple trips, skiing and snowboarding when I was in middle school and high school. But it wasn't until I moved out to Colorado that I wanted to, fully embrace it. I love, the adrenaline rush and just being outside. And so I actually started by working with skiers and snowboarders in sports psychology aspect. And that actually, got me out there even more. And so of course, once that internship ended, I, continued just snowboarding on my own.
Nice. And you did work at Winter Park, didn't you?
Yes, that was the internship. So they have a great program where they teach those mental tools to the competitive ski and snowboarders. And so I got to get a little taste of that while I was in grad school pursuing my master's.
Okay. And then is that where the passion for mountain biking came from too? Because obviously it didn't come from Wisconsin.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, and so just about every day I spent on my bike, like, biking around town. And so while it wasn't mountain biking per se, I just loved being on the bike and using that as a transportation. And so then coming out to Colorado, of course, loving snowboarding, loving that adrenaline, the speed, mountain biking kind of fit into that naturally.
Mm-hmm. So how then did you come across Sacred Cycle? And then tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so one of my former classmates at the University of Denver also worked with Sacred Cycle, and that's where I kind of first heard about it. I saw some of her posts on social media, and I reached out to her, and she told me a bit more about it. And that's where I kind of knew I wanted to be involved because, as you can tell, I love teaching different life skills through, alternative ways in the outdoors, and mountain biking is such a cool way to teach those life skills as well as healing from trauma. And so then that's when I reached out for the position. I actually joined originally as a volunteer. And after the first month, they offered me a paid position with Sacred Cycle.
Nice. And I love the fact that you said, the healing from trauma, because I think a lot of people don't realize how much of an impact, number one, having a community, number two, being able to do something physical, even if it's something they've never done before or never thought that they would be interested in, getting involved with something like that, how absolutely empowering that is of an experience. I mean, that's how I got into martial arts. And It's amazing. So there are so many different ways that we can heal, and movement, I believe, is a very important part of it.
Yeah, movement, it really just engages the full body, your brain and your body, which is very powerful. And as well as, a great saying is competence builds confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning new skills will naturally make you feel more confident as you improve upon those skills. And of course, that's, empowering. You're feeling strong and capable.
Mm-hmm.
And so a Sacred Cycle, it's a mountain biking program. And part of that is each participant gets individual bike coaching sessions each month.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether they're, an expert mountain biker or just getting started on it, they're still building different skills just physically on the mountain bike, which, as I mentioned, that in turn will help make someone feel more empowered and more confident.
I would imagine that it would be even more impactful if it was somebody who was maybe a little apprehensive about getting on a mountain bike, or somebody who never thought that they would ever do it, of putting yourself so far out of your comfort zone that then you realize that you can be successful at it, and you can learn a lot about yourself as well as the outdoors, and again, the life skills that go along with it. To me, that would be just amazing and life altering.
Yes, definitely. And, one of the great things about mountain biking is no matter how long you've been doing it, I think it will always push you outside of your comfort zone, depending, where you're riding, who you're riding with, when you're riding. So
Yeah,
it's a challenging sport.
As a former skier, I could really understand that. I never did mountain biking. It's never much even of, like a road tripping. Biking really was. I didn't even learn how to ride a bike until I was 14, which is really crazy. I was actually skiing advanced terrain in Western Pennsylvania on bulletproof ice. And, yet I couldn't ride a bike. And my parents found that incredibly perplexing, but it made perfect sense to me, because on a bike, you have to get a certain amount of speed to have balance and to propel yourself forward. Well, on skis, I had a snow plow that I could just absolutely go so slow, I could even just stop on the bulletproof ice. So I had that level of safety and comfort there, whereas the biking, I'd have to throw myself into it, and that's just not my style, or it wasn't back then.
Yeah, and that goes back to that sense of control.
Yep. Yeah. I got a lot of that. So with Sacred Cycle, do you work with women in just the Denver metro area, in Colorado, or is it nationwide? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so currently Sacred Cycle, excuse me, it works with women who are adults, 18 and plus, who have experienced some degree of sexual assault or sexual trauma. And the current programming is in Eagle River Valley and the Roaring Fork Valley. And we have plans to continue to expand it to reach the Front Range. We're still kind of building up that foundation to continue improving upon the program.
How long has Sacred Cycle been around? When was it founded?
Yep. Sacred Cycle was founded in 2017. So we're just about 5 years into programming. And it's continuously evolving. We want to, continue to improve, always have that growth mindset, and do the best work we can.
So how do people get a hold of you? Sacred Cycle.
Yeah, so a lot of participants with Sacred Cycle, it can be word of mouth through friends and family who have heard about Sacred Cycle. There's also community rides throughout the summer that are open to the public. So that's one way we kind of get our name out there. And then there's also been referrals from therapists who have heard about the program, maybe working with someone who they think could benefit from it. And then there's also our website, which is thesacredcycle.org. I believe you may be posting it on here. And on there are opportunities to learn more about the community rides. If you just want to get out and ride with a great group of people, you can also donate to the nonprofit. And then there's also an application if you'd like to be a participant in one of our upcoming programs.
Nice. So let me see, I had a specific question and it just went away about it. Oh, well, that happens sometimes. Yes, about the links. I've got all the links in the show notes.
Good.
So people, the listeners, you can go there and check out the links, because there is the link to Sacred Cycle, to the website. Also, a YouTube video. There's a link to a YouTube video how it came about, and it was the woman who founded the program in Sacred Cycle, so you can learn more about it that way. So it sounds like an incredible program, and I just, when I first heard about it, it was just, it was very uplifting to hear something like that it's offered. Just the fact that survivors of sexual trauma don't have to bear the burden by themselves. They don't have to walk around under that, cloud of shame or guilt or whatever it is, and that there is a way out. And that's why I was so excited to be able to talk to you and share your story with everybody.
Yeah, it really is just an amazing community. And as you mentioned, to not necessarily feel alone in your trauma. To join a group of women who have all had, somewhat of a similar experience, of course, very different in their own ways. However, to come together to build, learn those new skills, and also how they can relate to the healing from trauma and to other areas of your life. So, for example, this month, we're talking about mindfulness, as we've talked about earlier while we were chatting. And one of those big pieces is, how can you practice mindfulness while mountain biking? How can you continue to evolve that skill on a bike and then translate that to when you may experience a trigger or stress or anxiety? And how can you utilize that practice of noticing your thoughts, where they're going, pulling yourself back to the present moment?
Excellent. And do the graduates of your program stay in touch with each other if there's a certain, that connection?
Yes, which is huge too. I think that's a really special piece, is that we want to keep the Sacred Cycle alumni, or what they call themselves, the Sacred Sisters, a part of the program. Nice. And so each month we have a group ride for just the participants. We'll have maybe a couple bike coaches join, but it's for the participants as well as the alumni to just get on the bike together. No training involved, just go for a ride together.
No training, no therapy, but actually the ride itself is the therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Just, hop on your bike and get together and go for a ride. And that alone just builds that connection. You don't even have to say a word while you're biking, and you feel something, you feel bonded with someone.
So what type of, or what pearls of wisdom could you leave the audience with in regards to anything about, the life skills, adaptability? You have such an incredibly amazing background. It is so rich and diverse with the different populations that you've worked with and the experiences that you've had. You might even want to just leave us with how to survive 45 days. In the backcountry of Southeast Alaska, whatever it is that you want to leave us with, just little pearls of wisdom, or just a thought to leave us with.
Yeah, and we didn't even get into all the bear stories I have from working in Alaska, but little bits of wisdom. I think one thing that can be challenging to do, but I keep trying to practice it, is to lean into the discomfort, lean into the challenges. Lean into what feels uncomfortable and is challenging and difficult, because that's where you'd be surprised that you learn the most. And it might take a day to realize it. It might take 20 years to realize that something good has come out of that challenge, that discomfort, that feeling that you don't like, you don't want. But there's always something that can come out of those experiences.
Awesome. That's wonderful. But I have to tell you, you've been holding out on me. I didn't know there were bear stories. So we are going to have you back on the program in the future, because, I want to hear the bear stories. So just make a list, because I'm going to ask you about all of them, and I just can't wait to hear about that. So that's just crazy. Oh.
Yeah, a little preview. Picture 9 teenage young women. We're all on our own canoes, pulled up to shore, and a huge bear comes walking out of the woods towards us. Only, 30 yards away or so. And
oh my God.
Yeah. You could imagine the responses.
I can already hear the blood-curdling, ear-piercing screams in my head because I know how I would react, and that's probably the first thing I would have done. Oh, geez. Well, yeah, Devan, it has been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your time with us, and I really do appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about Sacred Cycle. It's like we mentioned, a very special, unique program, and it's an amazing community to be a part of, whether a participant or as a community member. Just hearing
or
about
as a
it,
supporter.
Yeah,
supporter or donator. Yeah, and you do have a Facebook page too, right?
Yes, there is a group for the Sacred Cycle, and that's where you'll find a lot of information about the community rides, and there's also blog posts kind of that talk a little bit about the programming and other areas and other themes around Sacred Cycle.
Okay, and once again, we'll have all the links on the show notes so people can find you. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And tell the dog he did a great job too. I appreciate him or her?
Her.
Whoops. All right.
That's okay.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you as well as always. And remember that there's always the light at the end of the tunnel. There is always the blessings that come out of the dark times. And remember to pay attention to yourself and start working on that self-awareness, and check out Sacred Cycle. It's an amazing group, and just follow them, support them, and just know that they're out there if you need their services or if you know somebody who might be able to benefit. So just another way of supporting them and supporting the people who might need it. So thanks again for listening. And that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.